Okay, so this segment is on record label types. So, being in the record label business, we're going to talk about the types of labels that are available uh, out there that you might want to use. So, in the music industry, a record label is a brand and a trademark associated with the marketing of music recordings and music videos. So, what is a record label? It's really a brand and a trademark. So, what the brand and the trademark does is they do the marketing and the promotion and recordings of artists, of their musical recordings and music videos. Most commonly, a record label is a company that manages selected brands and trademarks, coordinates production, manufacture, distribution, marketing, and promotion, enforcement of copyright protection of sound recordings and music videos. Labels also conduct talent scouting and develop new artists. This usually is done through the artist and repertoire department, and also maintains the contracts with the recording artists and their managers. So I had mentioned to you about the idea of putting on the A&R hat for you and your record label, trying to get out there and sign artists. So part of your lab is to pretend that you're the A&R. It's your job to bring potential artists to the record label and for you to decide whether or not you want to try and sign that to a record contract. Within the music industry, most recording artists have become increasingly reliant upon record labels to broaden their audience, market their albums, and be both promoted and heard on radio, television, with publicists that assist performance in positive media reports to market their merchandise and make it available via stores and other outlets. So the internet has increasingly been a way for some artists to avoid costs and gain new audiences, as well as the use of videos, in some cases, to sell their products. As I'd mentioned in the last module, I'd like you to consider your record label as a digital label. And the reason for this is to avoid the costs of physical production of vinyl or CDs. And if it's a digital label, you can do streaming and downloads. So let's talk about the difference between a major and an independent label. Because record labels could be small, localized, and independent, also known as indie. Or they may be part of a larger international media group, or somewhere in between. The largest three record labels are called major labels. And if we look at the share of streaming, we can see that lots of different things go on when the amount of money comes in. The label makes about 45%. The artist makes a percentage as well. I've mentioned 4%. It might be higher. I've seen them as high as 20%. No, actually, I've seen them as high as 50%. But the songwriters make money. Certainly, they make money in taxes, and the platform of where the streaming comes in is also making money. So we look at the share of streaming revenue. A record label makes about 45% of the money that comes in on streams. Now, as far as which platforms do the most, obviously iTunes. So iTunes is up at 56% of all money being generated comes in through iTunes. Bandcamp does about 30%. Amazon does about 10%, and this is through sales online of physical product that are sold through Amazon. And they also sell it as streaming on their platform for about 3%. So something to consider, the different types of sources of income that are coming in. And then when we look at a typical, maybe not typical, depends on the deal. But if we look at all the money that comes in, the whole pie, the record label makes about 63%. The distributor makes about 24%. And the band, depending on how powerful the band is, makes usually between 6% and 20%. So about 13% average. Out of that 13% is the lower, another pie. And out of that, various people make various monies. The personal manager might make 15% of that. The business manager make 5%. The singer makes some money. The guitarist and bassist and drummer and various musicians who play on the recording make some money, but so do the lawyer and the producer. So all of that comes out of this little small piece of the Great Divide. So you can kind of see how things are working within the industry. For every $1,000 in music sold, the average musician makes $23.40. So that's about 2%. Pretty low. That's the average. Okay, and where are they selling? Well, the United States by far is selling more music than any other country in the world. But look at some of these other countries. Japan, very large amount of music is sold in Japan. United Kingdom, Germany, France. And if you were interested in getting a gold record in the United States, you would have to sell 500,000 units. However, if you were selling in Ghana, you'd only need to sell 5,000 units to get a gold record. So it all depends on the market that you're in to determine the amount that you would need for a gold record. But if I'm looking at this and I only have a certain amount of money to spend, I'm going to be promoting my music in the United States, Japan, United Kingdom, Germany, and France, because that's the biggest amount of money that's going to be coming in. So I'm going after the big bucks and not necessarily after the smaller countries. It's going to take some money to market in those countries as you go through your career. Okay, so let's move on. Major record labels, the big three. Now, there used to be the big seven back in the day, and little by little, they got bought out by some of these bigger three and merged with others. And so right now, Sony, Universal Music Group, and WEA are the big three. We'll talk about each one of these in detail about what they do. And when I say WEA, that's Warner Electric Asylum Records all put in together. But let's look at it. Universal, for example, Sony and BMG. BMG used to be a really big music label, but they merged. And then WEA is part of Warner Brothers. And we'll talk about all the details with these in just a bit. But I want you to understand that there are things that go along with the majors. And one of the things is a sub-label. So a sub-label is a label that is part of a larger record company but trades under a different name. And you might want to consider this with your record label as you're forming it. You might want to think and do it this way. But we look at some of these groups. For example, Sony ATV is one of their sub-labels. Epic Records, Columbia Records, and RCA all are owned by Sony. Universal has a whole bunch of record labels as well. EMI, Def Jam, Interscope, Island Records, Virgin, there's Virgin again, now they're under Universal. Republic Records, Geffen Records, Motown, MCA, Capitol, and many more are all part of the Universal Music Group. And then we look at Warner, which is Warner, Atlantic, Elektra, Asylum, Atco, Sub Pop, Roadrunner. And you can see that like Roadrunner and Elektra, come underneath Atlantic as sub labels. And Reprise, Fueled by Raymond, there's just a whole bunch of them, and some of them are sub labels of each other. It's an interesting way that these go through this process. So they pick up and buy other labels, but remember, it's a trademark. It's a brand. So if the record label's a brand, they're not going to change Atlantic Records to become Warner. They already have Warner, but Atlantic is a brand on its own. So when I talk about record labels, we're talking about a brand and a trademark and how they relate to the artists that are signed to that brand or trademark. And just be aware that the artists are also a brand. Okay, so artists are brands, and so are the record labels. So they're working with each other. All right, let's talk about the indies just for a second. We're going to get back to majors in a moment, but just so we kind of fit these pies all together in the jigsaw puzzle. So record companies and music publishers that are not under the control of the big three are generally considered to be indie records. Even if they're large corporations with complex structures, if they're not under the big three, they're indies or independents, okay? Which is what you guys have. Independent record label. You're not a part of the big three. In the 1990s, as a result of the widespread use of home studios, consumer recording technology, and the internet, independent record labels began to become more commonplace. So they're everywhere. Artists are forming their own record labels. They're recording and putting out their own music, all because of the price. It's so cheap now to digitally record your music and put it up online and make your own money. And then you don't have the big three hammering down on you and it's not pop enough and we need to sell more records and come on, let's go, So you don't have the same pressure. The other thing about independent record labels, and I don't know if this is another slide, I don't think it is, but the other thing about this is if you start dealing with a music soup at a film production studio, they love dealing with independents. And here's why. They can call you on the phone and they can say, hey, we love this recording of this song. And if you own and control the P circle and have a good relationship with the owner of the C circle, you can negotiate a deal on the phone right now. You don't have to say, for example, if you're Columbia Records, you might say to them, hey, this sounds great. We'd love to do it. Let me run it by our legal department and we'll get back to you. 6 months later, after the legal department has gotten to it, they call back to Music Soup and say, yeah, that sounds good. Well, it's too late. You can make up your mind today, issue a license today, send them a copy today on an email, and they can begin processing their production. So the film and television industry love working with independents. So it's an interesting deal. Just be aware that some of those major film studios are also owned by companies that own major record labels. So you've got to deal with that too, because those people only put out their material. An example of that would be the movie Woodstock, which was filmed in 1969. Woodstock was a festival in upstate New York. Many, many artists performed there over a 3 or 4 day period. The movie came out, was produced by Warner Brothers. So do you think that Warner Brothers would put on their film an artist that's not signed to their record label? No. They're only going to put on artists that are signed to their record label. So in this case, the movie of Woodstock features only the artists that performed that were part of the Warner Brothers program. Any of the other artists that were on stage that maybe you've heard about were not in the movie because they're not signed to Warner Brothers. And I have to say, I'm guilty of this myself. My TV show that I had on in New York City, I did this on purpose to be in the living rooms of record label executives when they got home from the clubs. And that's why the show aired on Sunday morning at 1 o'clock in the morning, was because that's when they're getting home from Saturday night at the clubs and turning on their TV. Now, on my show, I featured artists that were on my label. I did this on purpose. I had no reason to be showcasing other artists on my TV show in New York when I could be promoting my own record label. So this is commonplace. It happens. And you would do the same thing. If you're going to be promoting your stuff, why promote somebody else's stuff? Promote your own. Anyway, independent labels are often artist-owned, although not always, with the stated intent of being able to control the quality of their own output. A lot of independent labels are artist-owned because the artist wants to control their own art. I've had artists who have been working with me as clients. They sign to a major label, then the major label gets them into the studio, they do their tracking, the artist is done. They don't have to go back into the studio for many, many weeks or months, usually months. In the meantime, the record label takes those recordings, starts planning their promotion, starts working on their graphics, and I've had albums that have come out for some of my clients, and the client did not even know they were out. They go into a record store and they see their album on the shelf. And they go, whoa, I didn't even know we had an album out yet. We recorded this 9 months ago. Finally out. Well, this is great. And then they look at the cover and they go, who designed this cover? This is not what we wanted to do. Well, they don't have any say on it. The record label does all of it. So the artist is going, wait a minute. I didn't want a flower on my death metal album. Well, the record label's doing the marketing. The record label's doing the promotion. The record label's doing all of the spending. And so it's their call. And so that's why artists like to put out their own material and not deal with the majors. So just be aware of that. Just also be aware that independent labels usually do not enjoy the resources available to the big three, and as such will often lag behind them in market share. Why? Because, as I'd mentioned in the last module, who are you going to call in Poughkeepsie if you want airplay? They have someone there. They know who to call because they call them every day. They know who to call because they take them out to lunch. Who are you going to call in Iowa City to get airplay for your record? The big three have offices all over the world. They're the ones who make the calls, to the radio stations. So they have relationships with radio stations, and therefore they are the ones that can deal with this on the big three. Often independent artists manage a return by recording for a much smaller production cost that a typical big label might spend on a release. So you might be able to get a studio lined up and recorded and do the whole thing for a couple $1,000s, where a major label may end up spending $20,000 to $100,000 on a recording that they have to recoup those costs first before they'll pay the artist anything. You, as a smaller independent label, can start making money much faster because your production costs are much lower. Sometimes they're able to recoup their initial advance even with much lower sales in numbers and sales. So you could recoup and start breaking even at a much lower number of sales than the majors because your costs are lower in the first place. Okay, so what's a vanity label? A vanity label is a label that imprint that gives the impression that it's an artist label. In other words, a band who puts out their own recordings may be considered a vanity label because they are putting out their own. Sometimes this happens where an artist owns the record label, but it's really a sub-label of a major. And the example I use would be something like the Beatles. They owned Apple Records. Apple Records was a sub-label of Capitol. Capitol was a sub-label of EMI. And EMI is a sub-label, I believe, of Universal. Sometimes a vanity label looks like it's owned by the artist, but it's not. And many times a vanity label is owned by the artist and run by the artist. So it can be either one as long as it's the artist and the label that go together. Anyway, in such an arrangement with vanity labels, the artist may control it all or nothing more than the usage of their name on the label. But they may enjoy a greater say in the packaging of his or her artwork because they run the label. Well, if they run the label. So it all depends on how that's comes across. Many artists earlier in their careers create their own labels, which are later bought out by a bigger company. Which is what we were just talking about, right? Starting up your label, getting it going, building it up, and then selling it. So that's a possibility. Now, the other thing that you can remember is everything's negotiable. So when you sell it to a major label or to someone with a lot of money, you can always tag along and say, well, I still want to run it, or it's not for sale. I still want to be the president of the label, or it's not for sale. So everything's negotiable, and this is something that you can do. Okay, so in this case, it can be sometimes give the artist greater freedom than if they were signed directly to the big label. And I told you why just a second ago. Here's we go with Nothing. There are many examples of this kind of label, such as Nothing Records, owned by Trent Reznor of Nine Inch Nails, and Morning Records, owned by the Cooper Temple Claws, who were releasing EPs for years before the company was bought out by RCA. Interesting. Okay, so then there's groups. Okay, so you may have heard of music groups, the Warner Music Group and so forth. Record labels are often under the control of a corporate umbrella organization called a music group. A music group is typically owned by an international conglomerate holding company, which often has non-music divisions as well. So you may be signed to Universal, but Universal is owned by NBC, and NBC is owned by Seagram's, which is a liquor company. And the liquor company is owned by Vanity, which does government contracts. A music group controls and consists of music publishing companies, record manufacturers, record distributors, record labels, and all the other things that could come under that. And I know that Warner, they have Warner Studios, they got Warner Records, they got Warner Brother Publishing, they've got, lots of different companies. And then they can sell those off one at a time. So Time Warner is a whole lot different than Warner Brothers Studios. Different owners. They still use the Warner name. Record companies, manufacturers, distributors, and labels may also comprise of a record group, which in turn controlled by a music group. So record groups, music conglomerates, they can all be under the same thing. The constituent companies in a music group or record group are sometimes marketed as being divisions of the group. These are big companies. Now let's talk about the internet and digital labels. Now, with the internet now being a viable source for obtaining music, net labels have emerged. Depending on the ideals of the net label, music files from the artist may be downloaded free of charge or for a fee that is paid via PayPal or some sort of online payment system. Also available for streaming. Some of these labels also offer hard copy CDs in addition to direct downloads. You can offer them to have them burned on the spot. And many net labels acknowledge the Creative Commons licensing system that thus reserving certain rights for the artist. So Creative Commons, we talked about this in another class. Creative Commons is where it's open source and the labels want their music out there, but they don't care about the money until licensing occurs later on. So digital labels are the latest version of a net label, and there's all kinds of net labels out there. And this is where I'm hoping you guys are going to start thinking about doing your recordings, offering them online for downloads or streaming with companies like Spotify. Net labels were started as a free site or just as a hobby point where digital labels seek to give the major record industry a real run for their money. Yeah, record label majors don't like all these independents propping up because you're taking money out of their pocket. It used to be that the Big Seven controlled all distribution. And in order to get anything happening in the record industry, you had to be signed to one of the Big Seven. Well, this changed with the internet. The internet has now offered it so that you, as an independent record label, can offer your music up there as you want. Now, you really can't be offering your music for a lot more money than what iTunes is selling. I mean, how much are you going to sell a single for as a download? If you offer it for $5, iTunes has got it for 79 cents. So you're competing price-wise, and we're going to talk more about this in a different class as well. Okay, open source is another kind of thing. I don't know if I like it as much. I do this with my handouts. I give them away for free. But a lot of people don't like open source because then, it's free. But I do like things like Indaba, where they do these producer contests or remixes. So they're giving away music. People are remixing them on the fly. But think about what happens then. This is marketing. So let's say 100 people are into this remix contest and they get paid $1,000 for the coolest remix. What's a producer going to do after they do a remix of a free download? They're going to play it for all their friends and family and fans, right? So you got 100 people already promoting their remix to their fans, which could bring in more fans for the artist who gave it away for free. Kind of an interesting way to do this. This was inspired by the free software that's out there. Basically, Linux software that does this. I know this is near the end, so I'll just end it here, and we'll start back up on Monday.